Good morning and welcome to the Point. 2014 so far has been punctuated by some wicked winter weather. But as the year goes on, our focus will be on a big election. Decision 2014 could have some really big implications for you and your family and neighbors. That whole process gets started off in some manner of speaking this week. The governor will lay out his agenda for the year, and it does have some political overtones. He, of course, is up for re-election should he decide to run. He hasn't made that official, but at least this observer believes he will. I talked to him just before the end of the year about what we might expect in his State of the State. Will you have a less aggressive legislative agenda when you roll out your State of the State this year?
Most likely, because again, you have to be pragmatic about that. What I would say is we're not going to slow down though. Again, I've been very aggressive about improving the state government and the public sector. So the way I view it is if we're doing less legislatively, there's a lot of opportunity to do things in terms of better management of government, better ways we work with our citizens, better customer service. So I've actually got a long list of things to say, okay, if we're doing less legislatively, how can we do more in these other areas that can have positive impact? Because again, I want to support the citizens of Michigan. They're my customer. How do I give them efficient, effective, and accountable government?
The governor will deliver his State of the State message on Thursday to a joint session in the House chamber. I went to leaders of the House to find out what they expect or would like to hear from the governor, starting with Speaker Jace Bolger. Mr. Speaker, we go into the final year. Well, your final year as Speaker and as a representative, but it's the final year of this session, and there's still a lot of things that haven't been done. The governor had asked for transportation funding. There's the question about auto no fault. But realistically, in an election year and going into these 12 months, how much of that kind of thing you really think you'll deal with?
Well, we have gotten a lot of work done, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I'm one who doesn't believe that in an election year you shouldn't do big things. I'm one who doesn't believe that in an election year you should back off of the things that the people ask you to do. And I believe what people ask us to do is solve problems. And I would make the observation that if not accomplishing things made you popular in politics, then the U.S. Congress and the U.S. President would be very popular. We know that's not the case. People send us to Lansing here in our state's capital to solve problems on their behalf. That's what we're going to do.
And we were talking just before we went on the air. One of the things that I'm not sure people recognize is the difference in the budgetary process over the past 3 years, because we went through those long days and long nights where budgets could not come together, where government came to what I call a virtual shutdown. It was kind of a faux shutdown in many ways because many services continued, but that was right here in the state of Michigan. You in the legislature, Republicans in the House and in the Senate, and with some Democrats, have gotten these budgets done in pretty short order. And of course, that'll be one of the first things on your agenda.
That's correct. And the people pay us to get our job done, and we think it's important to do. Our budget's not due until October 1st, but we've made a practice of getting that budget done in June. And I think we need to continue that. And that's so that our locals, our cities, our schools know what their budget is so they can then balance their budget, because theirs is due July 1st. And so while it was a few short 3 years ago, people laughed at us when we said we'd get the budget done by the end of June. Now today it's a regular course of business, and that's how it needs to be done. We need to make sure that we set expectations and then we meet those expectations.
Governor is going to speak to a joint session of the House and Senate in about a week or so, and when he does, you will already have a pretty good idea of what he's going to say. Do you expect him to continue with what some think has been a pretty aggressive tone in some of his State of the State addresses, or do you think he will pull back a little bit in recognition of the fact that there will be a lot of politicking this year? Notwithstanding what you said earlier, politics does play into this.
Well, I expect the governor to continue to be bold, and I'll let him deliver his speech. However, what I expect him to talk about is continuing to build Michigan's recovery. Again, Michigan has come a long way, but we still have a ways to go to recover from our last lost decade. And so I expect him to continue to lay out proposals for solutions and work with the legislature to tackle those problems.
If you could just wave a magic wand and have all the votes you needed, you had 56 every day for everything you wanted to do, what would you like to do in this your final year?
I have been happy to serve at a time in the legislature where we have gotten the things done that we said we would do. That those things that we've sought out to achieve, that we have gotten done. A couple things that I hope to focus on this year are continuing to build on our progress to solve our road problem, to continue to provide better solutions for our roads, and to continue to seek a solution on auto no fault, to maintain the best system we have in the country, but to make it more affordable for our residents.
When you talk about roads, I want to go back to that for a minute because I know that the governor has been passionate about wanting that $1.2 billion a year for 10 years. Those in the legislature that support him say yes, but we're not exactly sure where that money would come from. And there are others, and I would say over in the Senate, that have said, we don't think we want to do this right now. So that still is iffy. How does, if it does, the reported surplus, and I'm always a little hesitant to say surplus in government money because that money is not necessarily surplus, it's still tax money that's coming in, but maybe as much as $1 billion by some estimate over the 2-year period. Is there a potential for that money, if it materializes, to go towards that infrastructure problem?
Just as you say, when I hear the word surplus, I think taxpayer money. But as you look at our priorities, I expect early childhood education, roads, and tax relief for our taxpayers to be among the top. There'll be a lot that we discuss. But you do talk about roads, and we are underinvesting. We had been underinvesting in our roads. I think there is about $1 billion problem. Last year, though, we found $350 million from existing resources. So too many people look to solve that problem or measure the success in solving that problem asking, did you raise additional taxes? Did you raise $1 billion? It doesn't have to come that way. We can find the money internal, and I expect us to continue to build on our solutions. I also expect us to seek to make that process more effective, make sure we're delivering results for our taxpayers.
When you look over the past 5 years here in Lansing, do you believe that the people in the state of Michigan have been well served? And by that, I'm not asking you to take out your trumpet and somehow talk about all the great things and herald that, but do you think the people of Michigan are better off from a governmental standpoint than they were when you and your class arrived?
Now, I could rattle off a lot of statistics, like the state didn't have any money in its savings account, and now we have almost $600 million in our savings account. The state had been seeing year after year of growing debt, and the state has retired $20 billion in debt over the last 3 years. That 220,000 jobs have come back from the 750,000 that were lost on the prior administration. But those numbers don't matter. What matters are people's lives. And when I get excited is talking to grandparents, talk about their families being reunited, that talk about this last Christmas that they were able to celebrate here in Michigan because their kids and grandkids came back to Michigan. That's what we want to see going on in the future. We've still got a ways to go, but I think we're on the right path.
Bolger's counterpart is Representative Tim Greimel. He's the Democratic leader. And as you will hear in this conversation, he has a different wish list for what he wants to hear the governor talk about. Representative, we enter into the last year of this session. There's still a lot of things that haven't been done, but it's an election year. How much do we expect really does get done?
Well, my hope is that we can get a significant amount done and move our state forward, regardless of politics, regardless of the election year. But historically, unfortunately, a lot of elected officials kind of dig in their heels, don't want to take any risks, don't want to take chances, and wait until after the election to do the heavy lifting. My hope is we can overcome those kinds of political games, work together, and move the state forward.
If you were advising the governor, and to be clear, as a Democrat, it's not likely that you are, but if you were advising the governor about what he would say next week in the State of the State, what would you like to hear him say?
We need more investment in public education. We've seen drastic cuts in funding to public schools across the state under the governor and legislative Republicans, and it's time that we reverse that and start to invest more in local schools, not less. In addition, we need to make sure that we're restoring some basic tax fairness to the state tax code. We saw huge tax giveaways to big corporations, and they were paid for by tax hikes on everyday people. We need to restore some basic tax fairness by giving everyday people some tax relief.
How do you do that in the budget structure as it is now? We are hearing about the potential, and I always call this paper money because it's on paper right now, that there may be some surplus, but that surplus is sounding like it could run between the 2 years up to $1 billion. Is that the money you would use at schools and elsewhere?
Well, that's certainly one available source of funding, but there are others. Our state lavishes huge amounts of corporate welfare at corporate entities in the state. And when we came out with our alternative budget last year, we had a very detailed plan for trimming the corporate welfare and investing more in local education and giving some tax relief to working families and middle class folks who have been struggling.
When you talk about corporate welfare, is it your belief that that money or those tax breaks that go to corporations, big companies, doesn't help the underlying problem of more jobs? Because that's what the folks across the aisle would say, look, we help business because business is going to create jobs.
Well, the short answer is that the vast majority of corporate welfare does very little, if anything, to attract jobs and investment to the state. We have seen big claims from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, but as the Auditor General's report said about 6 months ago, those claims simply are not substantiated by the facts. A very small fraction of the jobs claimed to have been created by the MEDC were actually created. And we would do a much greater service to economic growth in the state and job creation if we invested in education and made sure that we had a workforce that had the skills and training necessary to attract the jobs of the 21st century.
When the governor lays out his agenda next Thursday, we can expect that there will be a couple of common themes that will be in there. But one of the things that we're not sure we're going to hear again is his message on infrastructure. However, he has said repeatedly that he believes that the legislature should work with the governor's office and come up with $1 billion+ a year, not just for next year, but for the next decade. I've talked to some of your colleagues, Democrats, who say, yeah, we think he may be about in the ballpark when it comes to dollars and cents, but there is no consensus between Republicans and Democrats about where that money should come from, if in fact they agree that it should be spent.
We've been at the table with Republican legislative leaders for over 6 months now. We remain committed to continuing those conversations. I've had recent conversations with Speaker Bolger and we'll continue those. We certainly believe that we need to find a solution to our state's crumbling roads, but we don't think that the solution is simply piling on ever higher tax burdens onto people who have already been stuck by Republican tax increases over the past 2 years.
We started out talking about the election cycle, so I want to come back to that a little bit. You are here in the Capitol in one of the most beautiful offices in the Capitol, but the problem from your perspective is that it doesn't say speaker on it. And as the leader of the Democrats, obviously you would like to be able to get a majority over in the House of Representatives through this next election cycle. How much of your energy, how much of your time will you devote to that? Obviously there's legislative work to be done, but there is an election too.
Yeah. Well, I often tell people I work 2 full-time jobs. I certainly work many more than 40 hours a week on legislative matters, but I'm also putting in an enormous amount of time in making sure that we get good people elected to state government. Unless we get new people elected to state government, we're going to continue to see business as usual. We're going to continue to see a very high unemployment rate. We need to get new people elected with new ideas who are focused on investing in education, creating jobs, and making sure that we have a fair playing field for all of Michigan's residents.
In many ways, you are one of those new people, one of those new faces that came in, assumed a leadership position right away. How have you found the operation of state government and or your relationship with Speaker Bolger, Republicans, or with your colleagues in the Senate?
Well, we certainly don't always agree with our Republican colleagues, but on a lot of issues we've been able to find common ground. We've been able to work together. Certainly the Common Core academic standards is one example of that. The expansion of Medicaid is another example of that. And there are going to be other areas where we can work together in a bipartisan way. That certainly doesn't mean we're always going to agree, and we're not always going to see eye to eye. But where we can find common ground and work together, we're committed to doing so.
So as we get ready for Decision 2014, we may start to hear part of the narrative that will develop as we head towards both the August primary and the general election in November. But it's not just about what's happening in Lansing. In Washington, an entirely different conversation is starting to take place that will also impact this year's election. We'll talk about that with Senator Debbie Stabenow when we return to The Point. Welcome back to The Point. As we start the 2014 legislative sessions, we'll be keeping a close eye on Decision 2014. Both in Washington and, as we just discussed, in Lansing, we'll start hearing how some of the conversation will focus towards politics in August and again in November. In Washington, that conversation has already begun, as we discuss with U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow. Senator, let's start with one of the first votes from 2014, and that was to extend emergency unemployment benefits for only 90 more days. Right. This is something that has become a narrative that we think will probably continue right through Election Day, because there is a lot of concern and confusion about exactly what this is all about. From your perspective, why is it vitally important, as many of your colleagues have said, to extend these benefits?
Well, Rick, we need to understand that we're in an economy yet that's not fully recovered, and we've got 3 people looking for every 1 job that's available. So that's the bottom line. I mean, we need to create jobs, but until that happens, until we have the focus on also job training, workforce development for the new jobs that are available, we've got too many folks, through no fault of their own, who've worked all their lives. They're mortified that they can't find work, but they can't. And so we've got an awful lot of folks right now that we don't want to lose their heat, certainly in this weather, and their food and the ability to put a roof over their family's head. So normally this has been something done in a bipartisan basis. We started the emergency federal benefits back under President Bush when we had actually an unemployment rate that was under 6%. So rather than arguing about this, we had to set a threshold. And as long as we don't have the jobs available, people should know that there's some temporary help.
Just as a curiosity, why wasn't this vote to extend it for 12 months? I mean, obviously, if you came along to June and the unemployment rate dropped below 4%, you could stop it or change it, but why not make it for another year?
Right. It should be for another year. I think it should actually be based on a trigger of, the unemployment level and jobs that are available. It was proposed for 3 months because we had just passed a bill to make sure that physician payments under Medicare were not cut. It was a 3-month bill, and it didn't have what they call a pay-for attached to it. So we thought, well, the unemployment bill, we'll do it for the same 3 months. We'll deal with the budget in 3 months. There'll be a larger package, and we could address the long term at the same time.
Some Republicans, you got about a half a dozen to go along with this process. Some of those, though, are calling for spending offsets, yet some of your colleagues say that's not necessary.
Well, I mean, certainly as somebody, as chair of the Agriculture Committee, where we are cutting within our own budget and saving taxpayers' dollars, and we're seeing the deficit come down, I certainly support that. But it is a question of priorities. As I said, we just passed a 3-month bill that makes sure that physicians don't see cuts in payments, and the Republicans did not ask for the same kind of offset as they do for people who are out of work. So we just need to be fair about all of this. I think in the long run, obviously, we've got to do things in a way that continues to bring down the deficit, is fiscally responsible, but we shouldn't be saying to one group of people, the budget rules don't apply, and to somebody else it does. And certainly in the case of folks who've been out of work and are struggling to keep the house heated and a roof over their families' heads, we shouldn't be saying to them, while you're looking for work, there's not going to be some temporary help through insurance that everybody's paid into.
We should point out that still has to go to the House of Representatives. We'll keep an eye on it. But something else you just mentioned, and that's the agriculture bill. This has been a long process. We're still not finished, but you're getting closer, you believe. True?
We are, Rick, very, very close. This has been so frustrating for me and for everybody in Michigan, all our fruit and vegetable growers, everybody who cares about protecting our land and water and supporting our farmers and making healthy foods available for children in school and so on. We are very close to getting this done. We first passed it 2 years ago, and the House didn't even take the bill up. Last year, we passed it again. The House had a lot of trouble passing it, but finally did pass a version of it. We've gotten an agreement. We're like 99% there with House colleagues negotiating differences. We just need to get the final piece done and pass it. Almost 1 out of 4 people in Michigan have a job because of agriculture in the food industry. This is a big deal for us, and it just needs to get done.
There was a time when ag bills were much more, I don't want to say automatic, but the reauthorization of the agriculture bill very often was something that was quite bipartisan and moved through. This has been much more difficult to do than historically. Isn't that true?
It is true, and I think for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one is that particularly in the House, we have a group of members now on the Republican side who really don't want to see us do anything. They don't want to see government do anything, even with the riskiest business in the world, which is farming. Nobody else has to worry about how much it's going to snow, how much it's going to rain, is it going to freeze, is it going to thaw too early, and we depend on them for our food. And we have the safest, most affordable food supply in the world because a group of people are willing to take the risk of farming. And so we have a partnership with agriculture, and we have a very vocal group of folks that don't think we ought to be partnering either on the nutrition side or on the agriculture side. And of course, that doesn't make any sense in our great country. And fortunately, a majority of the members want to see us get this done.
We've got about 3 minutes or so left. I want to talk to you about something that you have been working on, and this really has been a very bipartisan effort. You, along with Congressman Dave Camp and others, it's not just the two of you, but the two of you particularly said to the Corps of Engineers, looking into the issue of Asian carp in the Great Lakes, you said, look, we can't wait another 2 years for a report, so get us a report.
Right.
You got the report. When you and I talked earlier this week, you didn't seem particularly happy about that report.
Well, it's a step forward, but it's not what I had hoped for. And Dave and I pushed, first of all, to say that we needed the Army Corps to get very specific about what needed to be done on a permanent solution. We passed a bill. That was great. We have colleagues both sides of the aisle supporting this. We have all 16 United States senators join me in sending a letter to the Corps saying that they need to get specific. They did not. So now what we're doing, we're about ready to go into a series of public meetings. There'll be, I believe, 3 of them in Michigan and 4 others around the Great Lakes region where the Corps will lay out the options that they are proposing. I'm asking everybody to make their voices heard in terms of what they think ought to be done, and then Congressman Camp and I and others will basically look for a way to get them down to one alternative. I mean, we don't need 7 or 8 different options. What we need is one alternative that will work, that's cost effective, something that we can galvanize support for in Congress and get going on.
When you have these meetings, are those going to be just in the United States, or will the provinces of Canada be involved? Because I know that Canadians have a very vested interest in this as well.
Well, the Canadians do have an interest. They're welcome to come. The Army Corps' meetings are actually going to be just in the United States and in the Great Lakes region, and but they're certainly welcome to be a part of that. I mean, what we know is that, you know, these fish, it doesn't appear that they've taken hold yet, but we're concerned that we're seeing now some hints that there may have been a few fish that have gotten into the Great Lakes, or at least the DNA from the fish is in the Great Lakes. We've got to have a solution that deals with the water flow into the Great Lakes and creates a permanent solution beyond just depending on these electric fences and other short-term measures. I mean, you know, Rick, these are fish that get up to 100 pounds, and they respond to boat motors and knock people out of their boat or their jet ski, and or they also kill the other fish because they eat all the other fish food. They have basically no functioning stomach, and they eat all the time and eat all the plankton at the bottom of the water. And so they are a real threat both to recreational boating and to our fish industry. And so we need a permanent solution, and we need it now.
Senator, we'll be looking forward to follow up with you on that. Thank you very much for your time.
Always great to be with you.
Of course, things like that vote on unemployment insurance will find their way into the conversation of Decision 2014. We'll continue to follow that and, of course, keep you updated here every Sunday. And we'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. So the legislative sessions have begun in Lansing and Washington, and Decision 2014 has already started. We'll be here with it every Sunday morning.